Because this session now is on transform councils, revolutionised services. And so I'm going to kind of start it. We're going to get it out there, right? Things are hard. We've talked about that. We've talked at length about that already today. Things are hard. There are huge pressures. Demand is complex. It's increasing. There's reorganisation. The money's, is it sort of slightly underwhelming to say tight at the moment? We all know that. So what I want to do with this session is to focus on the opportunities, the examples where actually innovation is driving change, where we are seeing whether it's different ways of delivering things, we're using technology so that we can create boost to productivity or to take some costs out so that we can spend more on the front line. How is technology actually accompanying frontline workers as a real enabler for them? How are we rethinking how services are designed, and how should we think about innovation in terms of the different governance levels? And we have people who can speak to both the combined authority and the local council level as well. This panel is very, very kindly and generously supported by Beam, who are experts in how to apply innovative technologies to drive the sort of change in services that we're focusing on. So again, I just want to say thank you very much for making this possible. I have a brilliant panel. This is not going to be in the right order, I don't think. Well, maybe it will be. The unusual, no, it's not. I got excited there, thank you. I appreciated the slight whoop there, but it's not. So I'm just going to, nonetheless, make sure I get this exactly right with job titles, etc. But we have Rachel Astle, who's Chief Customer Officer at Beam, who is my first panellist on the end there, so that's the only one that's in the right order. Then in the middle, I have Jackie McKinley, who's Chief Operating Officer at Liverpool City Council. So very much in the thick of doing exactly what we just talked about there. Then I have Steve Skelton, who is next between Rachel and Jackie, who's Director of the Question Factory, but was previously Interim Director of Policy and Strategy at Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. Very long. So we've got that additional layer up view. And then finally I have Robin, who is next to me, Robin Tuddenham, who is President of Solace, but also Chief Executive, leading Calderdale Council. So again, a very kind of frontline view, as well as that broader sort of sector perspective that you will be able to share. I think we've had as best as possible kind of context setting already this morning, so I'm not going to give any more kind of scene setting, other than to say, do check out the brochure, which I can't remember if Simon already said we had a whole mess up with the courier, so unfortunately it will be arriving tomorrow morning for everyone at the venue, which that and Avanti lessons for the future. But you can read articles, and there are articles from some of our panellists in the brochure, so I really do encourage you to look at that PDF online. But otherwise, we're going straight into asking our panellists to give their opening remarks. We're going to keep it to 5 minutes each, so I will give you a stern look if I think you're going to go over. Because I do want to make sure we've got a real opportunity, even just from that session before, like shows the breadth of experience and expertise we have in the room, and it was really fascinating. I want to make sure there's an opportunity to ask questions, to really get into some of the stuff that you say in your opening remarks. But I am going to start with Rachel, if I can, to give reflections from Beam's perspective, actually applying some of the new technologies that can drive innovation at a local level.
So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So for those of you who don't know us, Beam actually started out life as a frontline service ourselves, and we still deliver casework every single day, supporting people into jobs and homes. And that means we have experienced to some extent some of the challenges that lots of people in this room will be living day to day. But it's also what led us to start thinking differently about technology and building new ways of doing things that might be able to both tackle some of the huge financial pressures that we face, but also increase the quality of service and think about things a little bit differently. On the technology side, we now work with more than 100 local authorities, and over 50,000 frontline workers are using our technology tools every single day in their work. In particular, AI-driven tools like Magic Notes that help social workers, and we touched on adult and children's social care just now, actually relieve the admin pressure of their role. And I would argue at least that some of the impact we're seeing is genuinely transformational. We're seeing close to a 50% reduction in admin time. That's a day a week that social care workers are actually saving. We're seeing healthcare trusts, local authorities cutting their wait lists by upwards of 80% once they introduce these changes. And I think that is pretty unheard of, and is reflective of kind of twin shifts that we're seeing in huge structural change and huge technology change kind of coming together at the same time. This panel will have a lot more useful insights than I, and a lot of the structural changes of how that actually comes to pass within an organisation. So I wanted to offer a couple of potential reflections on what actually drives change on the front line. I think the first is that the way you actually interpret what transformation means really, really matters. And one of the biggest pitfalls that we see is equating efficiency alone with transformation. And doing more with less is good. That is good progress often, and that's something that we all really need to do. But it's often not the kind of transformation that actually has the biggest impact. And at a time when technology is really helping us do lots of things faster, I think it's important we also take a pause and kind of ask two really important questions. And one is, do we want to speed up the process that we have? Like, one of the things we often talk to our partners about is like, we can do this process 5 times faster. Do you want to? Do we want to have a look at that process and whether it makes sense? And if we do want to speed it up, what do we want to do with that time that we've saved? If our social workers are saving a day a week, how are we going to use that time? Secondly, I think the desire to innovate and this question of culture within organisations is obviously a critical ingredient, but alone is not enough, and you do actually need the policy machinery to enable it. I think it's a complete myth that local government is not innovative and doesn't desire to change. We built the very first versions of Magic Notes 18 months ago, and more than half of social care teams use it today. There is not a willingness to try new things. But local teams are often facing big issues in getting things going, and we see councils who spend as long putting together the business case to run a small pilot as they do running the pilot. And we also all, I'm not going to labour the point, but there's so many cases of the pilots which seem to go well and then kind of go nowhere. Sometimes because procurement can't handle a different way of thinking about things, and sometimes because they weren't set up very well in the first place. So on this point, I guess what works isn't about moving fast at all costs. I don't think the councils making the biggest change are reckless. I think they are very disciplined, and they right-size process, innovation and due diligence in a way that's proportionate to the changes that they're making. The third factor that I would call out is commitment to the real day-to-day. Innovation in public service is fundamentally a human problem. These services are delivered by big teams of people working with people in complex ways. And that means that real transformation is rarely the kind of workshop with the post-it notes and the kind of fun bit of the role. It's actually the kind of gnarly, sometimes quite boring process mapping and real adoption support. And I think one of the reasons why Magic Notes has been so successful has been because it's great tech, but it's also wrapped around with really, really human support that's with people in their roles. It's not a kind of centralised software upgrade, if you will. And then lastly, probably unsurprisingly, the final thing for us is strong partnership. I don't think any of us can do the kind of change that we need to deliver alone, and certainly no provider like Beam ever could. You need public trust. It's completely non-negotiable in the kind of services that we are talking about, but we also all need to play to our strengths. We work in technology where AI is changing what's possible on what feels like kind of an hourly basis at the moment. It's impossible for anyone to keep up with that level of change, and equally it would be impossible for us to fully comprehend the scope of change happening in every organisation. So I guess I just finished by saying for me this is an enormously hopeful time. It's quite a stressful time, it's quite a fast-paced time, but it does feel like we actually have some opportunity to make some meaningful change for a type that we've never had before.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. What a brilliant way to open, and not least because we're bang on 5 minutes. But also, I know guys, everyone take note, but also because you hit some of my favourite words when talking about transformation, which is procurement, business cases, and change management, which we often don't focus enough on, as you put it, the gnarly bits, which are actually the things that make success, because The tech doesn't just apply itself, the people don't just automatically understand how to use it. It can't be fast-paced unless we reform the systems in which we're applying it in. So I thought that was a brilliant kind of both optimistic but also realistic setup for this conversation. I'm going to work on mine. I'm going to go to Steve next. Sorry, that's probably not quite briefing though, but we didn't set that up properly for you guys. So if I may though, Steve, pass it to you.
Okay, thanks very much. So I'm going to try and do a bit of a broad sweep reasonably quickly. I'll start with ourselves. So Question Factory, a strategy and innovation agency. We work with ambitious councils and combined authorities, and we do that by bringing practice experts in to kind of get into grips with the kind of the gnarly stuff that we talked about to make that kind of change happen. So it's slightly odd that I'm going to start with a view on theory of public service reform, which is that I don't think we have enough of it at the moment, which is not always an acceptable kind of view in a kind of a practitioner audience. But when I started doing some of this work, tail end of the Blair government, there was a very clear theory of public service reform, and actually the optimist in me thinks it's good that we don't have that degree of clarity, because I'm not sure it was right, that kind of market-driven, choice-driven, new public management philosophy, to the extent that I was working at the LJ at the time. We were being funded by MHCLG to try and work out how you implemented choice models within sort of municipal public realm management, which is, we didn't come up with any great ideas. But so the fact that there's not an overriding theory is perhaps not entirely a bad thing. But I do think it needs some work, and because in the absence, I think we've got a lot of fantastic activity focusing on sort of methods and means, and not enough kind of grappling with that as a theory that leaders, time-pressed leaders, political leaders can put into effect in ways that drive real substantial system change. So a theory of that needs to bring together a lot of the excellent work that has been done on sort of relational ways of working, on the people element, particularly the roles, I think, of professionals in being vectors of change. They can speed it up, they can slow it down, they're taught that their job is to do a certain thing, and actually fundamentally, as I think you said, that that change needs to take them on that journey. It needs to speak to the kind of tech and digital element of transformation, which is been, for me, the dominant story and driver of reform in the last sort of 10, maybe more years, certainly during the kind of Conservative and coalition governments, the impact that has had in rewiring my brain and many other people's brains, and to think about test and learn approaches, agile approaches, the importance of thinking of technology as a sort of an important parameter of reform. But it also needs to speak to the sort of system design questions that we're grappling with, funding, governance, money, incentive structures, statutory officer roles, parliamentary accountabilities, all of that really important hardwiring. And it's, for anyone that knows me or has worked with me, it will come as no surprise that I think devolution is an innovation that gives us a space to do all of that. It gives us a way of connecting the frontline practice with influence and powers to affect change at system level. And for what possibly one of the best periods of my career was when I was leading with some good colleagues Troubled Families programmes across Greater Manchester, circa 2013. I was also delivering services in neighbourhoods in Stockport, in very deprived communities in Stockport, and we were able to connect that practice, evaluate at the city region level, and use the platform of the then non-mayoral combined authority to drive change within the national programme design. And that sort of vertical integration needs a combined authority in the middle, and it gives you that mechanism for drawing up practice and influencing the big change, as somebody said before, reform of central government. That's where a lot of these decisions are taken. So a couple of things that sort of give me hope in this space. It would be remiss of me not to mention, Robin and Steve's excellent work on the Office for Public Service Innovation in Liverpool City Region. We were very pleased to provide some early support on that, and I think it's gone really well since. I think the interesting point about OPSI though is it could have been and can still be many things. There is not an absence of a use case for strategic regional support for public service reform and system transformation. It's almost like, where do we start? Like, and how do you make that pay? To your point, it's not just sort of small teams that have to spend so long creating the business case that they don't get to do the work. Finally, last point, the Great Manchester Prevention Demonstrator. Absolutely, for me, I live and set off this morning from the other mouthy northwest city, so I kind of really have a very close interest in seeing how that piece of work can grapple with some of these things, bring them together in a way which can be sold into central government as a implementable sort of policy.
Brilliant, thank you. I thought we might get away with not uttering the words new public management, but we did get that. And I think that point about theory is so important, because actually we have new public management. You mentioned the sort of relational public services model, but presumably there needs to be something that's slightly in between, because neither one of those really answers the question. And we do need a bit of kind of process and organisation and system focus, but we also need that individual input. And that point about how do we get practice, on the ground practice, up to actually transform Whitehall, which really is what needs to happen in order to realise the benefits of devolution, is a great question to pose. Jackie, the view from Liverpool City.
Yes, thank you, and thanks Steve for explaining policy, so I can just use the abbreviation now and don't need to remember. So, morning everyone. So I suppose a little bit of context from Liverpool, and from the discussion that you've had previously, there are so many similarities but also differences in our journey, and also how we've ended up kind of revolutionising our services. So, very similar around demand, complexity. IMD last week showed that we moved down the rankings, which is good in some, but we still remain second around health outcomes, so much to go at, but so much in a positive way for the city itself. We also had government intervention 4 or so years ago, and I think what that meant is we had to reform everything, and we had the opportunity to transform everything. The game was never just to get out of intervention, the game was to meet the ambitions of the city, meet the ambitions of the residents. That was always a really clear goal. But what it did mean was that we could go at it, which was, what does transformation look like here? What are the design principles that we're going to embed? How do we create that culture so we don't just kind of, move up to mediocre and try and get to where the best is? And really be able to focus on that, so early intervention and prevention, everything we want to be doing, digital, evidence-based decision making, put back in locality working, where we've drawn stuff up, to much more of the city level. So I think fundamentally we were able to do that, which was really key to where we are now. We also, as part of that, and there's some friendly faces in this audience that were part of it, could realign our partnerships. We had quite a strong partnership base within the city. We've never been the best partner for a period of time, got back into being a better partner. But that alignment that we had with Labour government, Labour CA, Labour Council has been really transformative from the period that we had before, but also good positive relations. I think that was really fundamental, and an alignment, understanding a strong city makes a strong CA, etc. So that's been really crucial to where we are. The other bit that I'd say we've done, and this is back to Steve's point around, we have then just JFDI'd it a little bit. So, we are there for everything. We are test, learn, grow pilots. We were in wave 1, we're in wave 2, we've been on HDRC programme. So there is that little bit of, we know we need interventions in this space, and we know we need support and capacity in order to be able to do it. So we've had great examples, Cradle to Career, there's innovation in the city, persistent absenteeism, loads and loads of different examples there. But we also know you have to put capacity, structure and an approach around this, and that's where some of the initiatives have come into it. And we have had great examples where we've applied this to our trickiest problems, homelessness, wave 2 of Test Learn and Grow is looking at lung health in children and young people with older hay. So, we're not kind of sitting back and going, well, let's just, we're really trying to nail it on the big kind of challenges and the big problems. I'd say from a kind of ingredients of success and the learning side of it, and some of these have already been picked up. I suppose one of the biggest challenges we've faced is we did not and do not yet have all the basics in place. Our data is a mess. Our systems, both ICT and some of others, are kind of a bit short, and we're trying to improve that. And capacity did not exist within, and we've had to really kind of nail that. We've also had to try and work out that we have to build on what already works as well. Innovation doesn't mean everything's rubbish and we're going to start again, as you were saying. Or staff have been. Our VCF sector, our business sector, our own staff, everyone has these ideas, and we really needed to try and build on that. And also, I think it was a phrase that Simon used in one of the other sessions, we ought to have to try and not crush the butterfly in this process. You know, it's very easy to go, oh look, Tesla grow, let's get one over there, when actually the innovation sometimes doesn't need that. So I think trying to work out how you keep that creativity and keep the energy has been really important. And then probably the last two things, and I'll order them in the right way. Governance, I think, as well. It can be really dry, you can get a sense that this is going to crush it. In a democratic organisation where you spend public money, you have to wrap that around it. And you have to be really clear. It can be, you know, proportionate, but I think sometimes we launch that things and then kind of stopped because we haven't had the right backup, the right buy-in. So that's been really crucial. And I think the other bit, which is the very obvious one, is people and relationships. You know, we had a great opportunity available to, and we had great people working for us, but also we could bring in a whole swathe of people at one go around our wider leadership team. Of course, 32 new directors at one point. And that meant we were able to set the culture. People who are going to work in partnership, going to have innovation, but also know that they have that kind of culture of being able to take risks, be able to succeed. And I think that's been really critical for us.
Brilliant, thank you. We're really hitting all the high notes. JFDI is definitely, definitely our kind of overriding culture, isn't it, Simon, in Blue State? They're probably slightly less risky in our online person charity. And I do want to, I think that's such a fascinating point about that tension between wanting to get on with things, needing, because the only way we find the right answers is to test, and sometimes that won't work, and we have to have the confidence to do that. But also that kind of, it's public money, we have to have accountability. I want to come back to that in a moment. But before I do, Robin, your view both from Calderdale and then the much bigger sort of helicopter view, exactly, from Chief Execs.
5 minutes. I bet Graham was thinking, good luck with that. I have to say, I'll be good. I'll be good. So yes, the Solace, the professional association for local authority chief execs and senior managers, nearly 2,000 members across the whole UK, developing future leadership, really important, and chief exec of one of the 5 Met councils in West Yorkshire, obviously with a maturity evolution deal with the first female Metro Mayor, Met Tracy Braden, so I'll pick up those two contexts. I mean, I think, you know, it's a consequential day, isn't it, as we go into the budget, but it feels every day is consequential right now. And I do think that human conditions of people working in public services is an important context for transformation. And the issues around civility in public life, how it feels to be operating in a system where you can read the narrative of broken, failing. You know, so there's a really important context that I think is important. I think the word hope is really key, but we spent in Calderdale nearly 2 years developing our place vision for the borough for 2034, so nearly the same time scale. We decided we'd only have 8 words to describe the kind of place we want to create, and it was 900 stories with our public and our businesses, and it's all on our website, Vision 24, and we collected those stories over 2 years. And one of them was hope, but we talk about active hope, so hope with agency. And we do a lot of workshops with our partners and with our communities around hope with a sense of agency, because you can hope if you're going to win the lottery and buy a ticket. Or you can hope you're going to try something new that's going to make a difference. So I think that's important. A few other things I think around culture and conditions. I do think the Tesla and Grow is really promising. I think the language of that is really good. I think Jackie, you're right, it can't be on the fringes of what we do. We need a sort of core set of ethics, empathy, and courage about the conditions we're operating in. I think it's really hard to feel you can take risk right now in public services. The consequences are very significant, not only for human lives, but also even minor errors. Our minor failures can be having massive impacts, but the rewards are massive, and we have to be prepared to take risk. And we have to create kind of psychological safety for people to feel they can take risk. So there's a leadership task that's really important, I think, in that. And that has to be values-driven, it has to be out there, and you have to have leaders that can talk about risk and not always getting things right first time. The other thing I think is important is place. Obviously, I would say that, the power of place, we should report in the summer on the power of place, the solace. We all live somewhere, and our places live in us. And we have some distinct, what I call the empathy advantage in local government. We have 72% of our staff live there, 90% in West Yorkshire. We are immersed in the places that we serve. Civil service can find that harder, and we are working, I'm talking to colleagues in civil service about how we create a sense of connection to place, almost coming home to connect to place, because that empathy advantage is really important. And if civil service policy thinking and policy makers can have that sense of connection, that's really important. Because I think will create better outcomes. And then just 2 examples amongst the things. Well, we've done magic notes. I'm just saying our social workers and even our DAS were quite sceptical, and they were convinced within hours. So we're using that. We're doing some work on EHCPs. That's all good. That's all really important. But I do think there's something around the really big changes around people's lives and living complex lives. So 2 things. We have redefined our leisure service into a well-being, active Calderdale social movement. It's taken us 5 years. These things don't happen immediately. We've done it with Sport England. We've done it around places that most are inactive. We've seen the performance journey now. We are the 2nd highest in our neighbourhood group in terms of the people that are active. We were in the bottom quartile. We have redefined social movement and being active in a way that people feel included in, connected to their place, and feel well in. So that's one thing. The other big thing that we did was actually about learning from failure. People were dying on our streets, men actually mostly young men dying on our streets, and we commissioned we commissioned an inquiry locally, which we spent over a year understanding the consequences. And the report we produced was called Burnt Bridges, because that was the words that people that we were talking to and in the system heard. You've burnt your bridges, don't come back. Complex behaviours, moving from one part of the system to the other. And we brought people into a special accommodation resource in the pandemic. We've kept that service running. We've worked with Recovery Steps and Happy Days, local organisations, just to reduce the number of people dying in our streets. And that's been a long-term piece of work around complex need that we are proud of, but we are still on a journey on. So that's a couple of examples. And then just to finish, what are the conditions that can help us thrive? So we have to be flexible with how we use the money. We have to recognise it's complex. We need an informed disruption. I don't think we can get excited about disruption. Oh, let's be disruptive. That's not easy for a practitioner with a sense of accountability and risk and consequences. We need informed, well-informed disruption that thinks about equity, that thinks about opportunity, that thinks about place. And we do have to seize this moment because we can't keep on like this. Just one thing I'll leave you with. If I said the words adult social care and asked you to think of something or a person, I suspect, quite understandably, nearly all of you think of someone 85. I think the quote was 85. So, most authorities are now reaching a tipping point where the most spend is working age adults. ADAS have released a report today showing an increase in 1/3 for 18 to 24-year-olds costing over £7,000 a week in the last 12 months. That's potentially people that will be through a lifetime journey of cost and complexity and support that we rightfully need to do the best for and their families. So that is a reality around people over 65, but that is a diminishing aspect, and that's why adult social care is the grand challenge of our generation.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And again, just huge amounts in there, and I think that reminder of the importance of the workforce and where they are is really important. I was struck on the word lab earlier that exhaustion was one of the big words at one point. I mean, it kept changing, but that context in which we're asking people to embrace change, do things differently, think of new ideas, be informed disruptors, is in a context where people are pretty burnt out and there's a lot of pressure, and so thinking about how we deal with
Still
that.
want to do work.
And still want to, but how do we do it in a way that is sensitive to the fact that there's quite a lot of pain in the sector at the moment, but also what an amazingly visceral example of the importance of doing transformation in your Burnt Bridges example, of actually literally saving lives, doing this transformation, revolutionising how we do services and engaging those people in greatest need does deliver, huge rewards, and I thought that was just such a brilliant example. I'm going to come to audience questions in a few minutes. I'm going to take chair's prerogative as I want to pick up on just a few of the things that were said that do get thinking about what you would like to ask. We've got a huge amount of experience and kind of different levels and stages of transformation. So please do think of some great challenging questions for our expert panel. Brilliant set of opening remarks. I wanted to, Rachel, if I can, come back to a question, which I was really fascinated by your point that do you really want to speed something up? I thought that was such a counterintuitive thing to say. And it made me think about sometimes we really speed up processes by applying some technology, but that just shunts something down, you know? So, which I think you were slightly alluding to, that if we speed it up, can the system at the end cope with that sped up amount of demand or whatever it looks like? And you know, everybody will be familiar with the problem of cost shunting in public services, where we do something brilliantly better in one place and somewhere else isn't able to, and now we've just shifted the problem. And I just wondered, how has that conversation played out, where your technology can, I mean, remarkable stats that you gave, you know, 50% reduction in admin, you know, that kind of stuff. How are local authorities you're working with thinking about making sure that they're doing service redesign at the same time as applying the technology?
Yeah, big question.
Sorry, maybe 2 minutes answer?
Second question. I think there's two aspects to it. So one is that in social care in particular, the sheer amount of work, like the sheer workload, means that it's very, very hard to even have the space to start thinking about those big questions. And so I actually think tools like Magic Notes and others that help with the admin and the day-to-day can start to create that space. So
you're boosting capacity.
It's a sequential piece. I think the councils who are doing this kind of work really well, though, are thinking about technology solutions as part of bigger change. And they are thinking about, okay, we have broad challenges with service delivery, with capacity. We probably also have challenges with staff retention and well-being, skills development. What are all the pieces of the puzzle that fit in? And we are very rarely, I'd love to say we're a silver bullet, but we're not. These things are like collective solutions. And I think where it works really, really well is you are sitting around the table with service teams, with digital teams, with security teams, with elected members, and you're thinking about where does this fit in a broader piece. And yes, there will be downstream impacts. And I think where the sector is doing really interesting things is then thinking, well, how can we solve those things? And so whether that's providers like ourselves who then start building new technology, because wherever you solve one thing, another thing pops up and you can start thinking about another solution, or it's a policy change, or it's a people change. But that conversation from different angles, I think, is where you start to find some solutions.
Brilliant, thank you. And Steve, obviously you were in Combined Authority, and I don't think it's a controversial thing to say, that it would be the first time that we say something controversial, but I don't think it is to say that there are still some tensions with how combined authorities work with different levels of local government below it. And clearly, innovation, I mean, it's interesting that Jackie said in Liverpool the advantage of the alignment, both political, although I mean, you mentioned the kind of political alignment down at every level, but that's not the case in all areas. And so how should we be thinking about innovation at a city region level, where maybe there's a bit more of a complex, sort of a bit more tense environment? How do we drive innovation at a place-based level in that context?
A really, really good question. So I think the first thing is, so I'm struggling to let go of the phrase combined authority, even though it was...
Sorry, strategic authority, no, you should call me out on that.
No, I end up using them both, depends where you are in the country, but mainly because the first part of the answer to that question is they have to be in combination.
Okay.
That is where the value in public service reform comes from. It's like a governance innovation by fluke, really. And I think holding the regional and the local tiers together and making the local an active part of the regional gives us actually some really impressive opportunities, no more so than in public services. So you have to start by conceiving of it as a collective endeavour, and within that, accept that there are different roles and responsibilities. Having said that, I mean, you know, I'm going to say even in Great Manchester, I shouldn't say that. In Great Manchester, where we've done this work, I did this work when I was in the system over there, and I've done some work with the system. since, I still, I guess, talk about a lot of this as sort of vampire territory, and that the CA has to be invited over the threshold. You know, this is still, particularly in the sense of statutory people services, you know, and quite rightly too, because if I was a DAS or a DCS, I'd be guarding any, you know, writing thing that I could post it notes, you know, coming into my world pretty carefully, as I was always guarded pretty carefully by various capable professionals when I was working with them. And so it has to be a very relational thing, but one where I think we can do more to unpack the value the different parts of the system can bring. So I think for those areas like Liverpool City Region that are moving towards an integrated settlement, I think that opens up some really interesting questions about the ability for the CA to hold funds in between years and across periods of time, and also to flex them in a way that might make you know, public service system leaders think slightly differently about that role. I think the role of a mayor in possibly providing political cover and accountability for difficult rebalancing decisions of public service funding is like possibly, I think, the thing that might really unlock something here, because no Secretary of State has a reason to move money from the health system to the employment support system, because they only run one of the systems. A mayor, with their leadership cabinet, is responsible for successful outcomes for all those people in place. So if we need to find somewhere to take accountability for moving some future NHS growth monies into employment support programs, let's say Live Well maybe, then, you know, I'd be very interested in that conversation. Whether the mayor wants to have that conversation is another matter.
And that's also a brilliant tee up to our next session, where I will be chatting to Sir Richard Police, and I may well ask about some of those questions about how we can make a different trade-offs and decisions. But Jackie, I said I was going to come back to this question about sort of the kind of JFDI mentality, needing to take that approach because actually good disruption is going to be the only way to get to better outcomes in really tight, constrained and uncertain circumstances. But you touched on briefly but it is public money, we need the right accountability. How are you thinking about, and maybe it's the bigger context, as you say, kind of the strategic authority, because I think it is a combined authority in Liverpool, the combined authority and the kind of individual councils within that, or maybe it's the view from just Liverpool City. But how are you thinking about that trade-off of accountability, scrutiny, and a bit of JFDI and kind of taking risk? Because I think almost everybody has mentioned this issue of risk, and how do we manage it in a system that is under pressure? We have to take risks, but it's also high scrutiny.
Again,
sorry.
I think there's about 5 questions, but let's give it a go. So I think, again, the context that we've had in Liverpool also more broadly across the region is we have been able, I think, to put our arms around things. So I would say local authorities, big massive organisations, running hundreds of services across, you know, 500,000 people, and a city like Liverpool, sometimes it felt a bit difficult to kind of grasp your hands and, you know, get your hands around things. I think what we have been able to do, because a lot of our services were very poor, you know, inadequate from a children's point of view, you know, similar, I'm sure, on CQC, but, you know, now we've got good. What we have therefore been able to do is put that little bit of methodology. So our transformation programme, when we very first started, had everything in it, literally everything. You know, if you're doing a restructure, we're going to name it as transformation. Maybe that was because we needed staff to understand that things needed to reform and change, not just kind of move up a little bit. What we've then now needed to do, we can't have a transformation programme that covers everything. It's just not feasible. You'd have 200 people sitting in the transformation team. But some of that structure and methodology, I think, has been a legacy in the council. It's also meant that we were able to sustain some of the changes and improvements, and I think that's really where you need that little bit of governance there. So if you take examples like bringing in another AI, we wrapped that in where we said, right, we're going to have co-pilots, we're going to have some changes. What are the top 50 problems that we should be addressing this? And staff came back and told us what they were, note-taking at meetings, the amount of time it takes to recruit anyone here, etc., etc. You know, really productivity type issues. You know, you could say, well, there's no governance needed around that, but what does that look like? But we just wrap little bits of things around it where we could say, why have 10% of those dropped off? What is it that's getting the problem? Why is it that adults or children haven't come forward with any suggestion? You know, so we were just able to have that helicopter view of what's been happening. I think the other part of it, which, you know, we've talked about, is both the money and the risk side of it, and I completely agree with you. There's certain areas you're not taking risks here. You know, our children's services at the moment, we're on a very clear Ofsted journey. You know, there's things we need to do, there are things we don't need to do. But there are other areas where we can take risks, and you wouldn't think housing was one of them. But the challenges that we have in that space, and you know, the number of families we had in B&Bs over 6 weeks, you know, everything that was there, we needed to take some calculated risks there, and that's where we applied our Tesla growth. You know, got all the kind of people from the Cabinet Office in and said, this is what we're going to do. And it looked like a data problem that we were solving and a data answer that we came up with, but the human response to it and the human benefits of it has then led to savings, has then led to, you know, more. So it's probably a garbled answer.
No, I think that's really helpful.
I think it is. We absolutely have to have a bit of structure there. It is public money. We have to save money as well as do the right things here. But really getting that culture where people felt, you know,
I love that idea. You know, you just wrapped your arms around, because there's a very sort of protective kind of that gives a real image of kind of, it's safe, we've got your back, we're here, we'll support you, and we can try these things. I think that's a great way of describing it. And then, Robin, I wanted to ask you, and maybe this is a slightly unfair question, so feel free to, instead of being too exactly more a politician and avoid it and answer something else. But I wanted to ask, so clearly this is an unbelievably challenging time, as we've talked about, for leaders in the sector. It's a bit your solace hat on. But it's also a time which is being made much more complicated by the reorganisation. That, you know, there is a risk we are going to see great leaders leave the sector as a result. How is Solace thinking about making sure that in this kind of very uncertain, ever-changing kind of context, that actually brilliant leadership, which will be so key to delivering any form of transformation, is actually in place?
Well, yeah, so reorganisation is clearly absolutely absorbing the bandwidth of quite a lot of colleagues. It's not the whole of the sector, and clearly it's, you know, so we are not in that state, and a lot of the north isn't. I mean, some bits of Lancashire are. That's all absorbing. However, it was ever thus. You know, so if you're not in that situation, you're in a situation where even if a place has a combined authority, moving to an MSA, we are working through an integrated settlement at the moment. You know, and that's tough. Even with 6 leaders of the same political party, and agreeing those shared outcomes, delivering significant infrastructure projects, obviously mass transit in West Yorkshire. So, which are fundamentally questioning the role of local government and its future. So I think we're all in that state. What we do in Solace is, I think, capture, I hope, the appetite, energy, hope and enthusiasm of future leadership, as well as literally that word, provide the proverbial arm around colleagues doing the work now. You know, so let's, you know, shout out for the colleagues that have been doing the work now and for many years, because we are seeing that, you know, the sector changing. We are seeing the sector hopefully on a journey around leadership becoming more reflective of the places we serve in all senses. But we are also seeing some challenges in that, so our leadership amplify the programme for global majority colleagues. We've got the work we do with all new chief executives for the LGA. So we are, I think, we've been quite poor as a sector. Unlike the NHS, has a leadership academy, the civil service has incredible development.
We could have a discussion about how effective some of those.
Yes, well, we didn't even have anything really. I mean, we had Ignite, which is brilliant, and we've done that for several years, and I went through that in Solace. But we've now got a comprehensive programme which really does equip, because it's stuff like governance and risk and accountability, and the exposure of people in not only head of paid service chief exec, but director roles, and how, you know, how visceral that can feel and be, and people going through really challenging times, and our workforce see that and think, well, if that's happening to you, how's that going to be for me? So we do invest in all of that. It's really important. The world is challenging, but people want to do this work. You know, we've got Springboard. I think we are going to struggle, which is the future leaders. We are going to be massively overwhelmed. People don't want to stay in the government. They do. They are really, you know, I think we're struggling to meet the demand. So people want to do this work. We had an apprenticeship in public health out last month. I think we had 140 applications. We could have probably shortlisted 60 of them. You know, people want to do this work because there's something about it, and actually talking in the language of Gen Z, Gen Alpha, just talking about values, talking about purpose, talking about impact. People want to do work that has meaning.
Yeah.
And we don't often describe the meaning we do and the impact we have in our places. Yeah. So I'm quite hopeful about that, even though it's always going to keep changing.
See, I said ours was going to be a positive session, Simon. Brilliant, thank you. Right, I'm going to open it up to some questions from the floor. So I'm going to take 3 in a row if there are 3 people who would like to ask questions. Anybody have a question? Wow, we've been that comprehensive. Yeah, we've got a few questions. Okay, we've got 3 hands up. Brilliant. I'm going to take all 3. Can you just very briefly say who you are and if you have an organisation? I will cut you off if you start giving me your life story, because I want to make sure that as people, normally we get a first bunch of questions and everybody puts their hands up for the next one, so I want to make sure we can get through a few. So questions, not statements, no life stories, I'd be very grateful. So I had one hand up here, and there's one in the middle that I can't, there's a gentleman there. So we start there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My name is Adam from Carnegie UK. I'm really interested in the panel's views on the challenges around scaling what's proven to work. So how do you take a proven initiative or an intervention and scale it? Because that seems to be one of the challenges we have that cuts across a lot of things.
Brilliant question. And I think I wrote scalability 7 times in my notes on that. So thank you very much, because I didn't get a chance to ask that question. Robin, over here. Sorry, I introduced you, but you can introduce yourself properly.
Thanks, Charlie. I'm Robin. I'm a recovering politician, 20 years as a councillor in local government, and just starting a PhD, which is looking at an alternative to social contract theory. Very simple question. Is a 4-day working week transformation?
Great, thank you. We'll probably go for a yes/no answer from that. And then there's a gentleman in the middle just here. Yeah, the glasses. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Will from Core Cities. Given the pace of technological change, so obviously we've got AI, we've got battery technology, we've got self-driving technology, all those things, how do you kind of ensure yourselves that the horse that you go with will be the one for the future, and you're not just going to have to redesign the services later on because the next big idea?
Great, and I'm hoping someone might answer how we procure and whether we do competition ourselves. But I'm not going to answer that for panel. So I'm going to start with the second question, because I do think, and again, because I want to get more questions in, it could be a yes or no, maybe one sentence to justify your yes or no. I'm going to go down from this end. So Rob, I'm going to start with you. Is a 4-day working week transformational? Yes or no, and one sentence why?
Potentially.
Yeah.
So it can be. And it's about understanding the sector and what we do.
Okay.
So,
all right.
So
Jackie?
It's not all one size fits all.
Okay. Jackie?
No.
Great. Thank you. Perfect. Perfect. Steve?
Feel pretty damn transformational for me right now.
Okay. And Rachel?
No.
No. Okay. Brilliant. All right. Perfect. Thanks so much. Right. So going back to the question about scalability, and as I say, I generally did write that word down quite a few times, because that is one of the challenges we get kind of pilotitis. It's something we've really talked about in Whitehall that does this, particularly around AI. You know, you get the pilotitis and no one ever scales it, so you don't actually realise the benefits. But obviously that scalability question is not just technology, but it's also different programs and test and learn, and you know, across the board, how do we make sure we're actually rewiring the business as usual and not having kind of innovation as a sort of slight bolt on that stays in its corner. So, who would like to pick that up first? I'm going to, Jackie, whether you might want to say something about that.
Yeah, so I think there's a real challenge that we have, because we want to be as hyper-local as possible, and we know that different communities have different needs and different areas, etc., etc. So you know, you absolutely have to be thinking of the place and how people interact with it, etc. But we can't invest in anything, I think, that doesn't have the potential to scale. particularly if you are talking about, you know, service-specific innovation. And the whole principle of test-learn grow is that we test learn and see whether you're able
And
to
do the grow.
You know, and there's lots of checks in that, and you know, can we change by next week, etc. So I think we do absolutely absorb the principle of that, whilst keeping that hyperlocal community, you know, engagement element to it. One of the things that we're trying to do, and it is a shout out for the CA and OPSI, is what does learning and growth look like in that? Because again, if we're just coming out, oh, it's only for Liverpool, it's only for a particular area. And, you know, we want this scalability to also address the, you know, right across the region, but also much wider, because the risk that we have in local government is that we all say, but we're slightly different.
And everyone's doing pockets of stuff.
You know, and also the bigger risk, I think, which is why we have entered into test learning grow, is we need government to change as a part of this. So if it's just the council and the CA, you know, does a couple of things differently, and the big barrier that sits there is, you know, is government policy. That needs to be part of the deal that we have here. So I think get that balance between hyperlocal, what we're trying to do, but if you're not going into this in order to kind of bring benefits much wider, it's a real difficult task.
Brilliant. And I wanted to ask Rachel me that question about the pace of technological change. How do we make sure that we're not, you know, buying the thing that, I mean, either given timescales in government is already outdated by the time we actually get the product, or is just something else takes over, you know, quite quickly. How do we think about that? You know, you are an AI company, right? Yeah, that's what you provide. How do you think about that?
Probably a couple of things. One, it was reassuring for us to see some of the US local announcements this week.
Which Liverpool is one of the...
and one of the things that really called out really clearly is don't lock yourselves into multi-year contracts that you can't get out of with providers who, speaking frankly in this room, like have little incentive then to innovate. So I think carefully about what you're buying at the moment, because you could easily get locked into some things that don't make sense long term. I think it kind of links to the scalability question for me. It's the incrementality. So what are the things that you absolutely need to get right now? And then how do you think about things that can evolve? And that means having the commercial structures, that means you can change your providers, you can think about things. I would argue it does mean partnering rather than building, because having that kind of ability in-house is going to be almost impossible to scale, certainly at the local government organisation level, where you've got hundreds of organisations essentially building that. You see that even with due diligence around info security. You know, every single council that we've worked with has gone through info security processes, as they should, but they've all done them. Every single one has done them. If you then extrapolate that to building technology, updating technology, the resource spend there is a bit nuts, really, if we're honest, isn't it? So it's how do you localise where it makes sense and then share where it also makes sense.
Great. I do want to get those other questions. I know, Robin, you want to come in very briefly, but then I do want to,
So I suppose I listened to a panel discussion on AI weeks ago, and they were asked the question by the audience, are you frightened of AI? And it was an interesting question, but I thought, are you frightened of the future? I think there's a real dissonance at the moment, and we're not talking enough about the fact that our communities that we serve are using AI in every part of our lives, and it's already redefining the way we operate as local government. So I've gone from like occasional discussions on this, almost daily discussions on our whole complaint system is pretty much struggling, if not on its knees, because the complexity of complaints. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. People are working with AI to planning is being redefined already right now. Contact with public services, how people with complex disabilities live their lives in some of the innovative ways is already possibly being redefined. So it's changing our lives now, and we've got to keep up with it and help shape it.
Brilliant. Okay, I've got time for very, very quick couple more questions. So, yes, there. Was there another one to talk about this side that I saw? No? Okay, well, we'll go back. Oh, yeah, and Kate there.
Sorry, Christian from MCHLG. This is more of a personal view, not the government.
Can we have, is it a question?
It is a question.
Okay, perfect. Straight into the question, please, because we're running out of time.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
What's your view of the return on investment at a local level for AI is way overblown. It's a lot of councils are putting way too much resources, limited resources, into AI that is fundamentally not going to affect the day-to-day caseload. And
Great.
Um,
how do you differentiate between
How are we making that choice of
Yeah.
productive AI and just whizzy stuff that doesn't deliver results? Brilliant. And Kate, very brief question there, please. Thank you, Corey. Great little sprint there.
Thank you. Kate Honorary Prof at Salford University in Public Health. Would the panel like to identify which innovation would perhaps be the quick win for building confidence in communities, and particularly an innovation that would reach across all of the communities, in other words, tackle inequalities?
Lovely question. Thank you so much, Kate. Two great questions there. So Chris's question was, how do we make sure that councils and local government is actually spending very tight cash on AI that is actually going to deliver returns and benefits from it? And the second question from Kate is, which innovation could deliver a quick win to help build confidence in all communities? We do have 3 minutes left for everybody to answer both of those questions. We could maybe take 5 if Sir Richard doesn't mind going 2 minutes over into the session.
10 minutes over.
No, we will be strict on that, but thank you, that's very generous. So you can either just pick one of those to answer or pick 2, but if you do, it's a 30-second answer. Yeah, perfect, Steve.
I'll take the second one.
Yeah.
So I think digital democracy tools, so I'm sure things you'll talk about this afternoon, like Polis, platforms for people to have meaningful debate in the digital realm as an augmentation of representative democracy, have huge potential. We've seen them used in other places. We should use them more here. Can I just go very quickly? I know I'm not
If it's like
allowed
20
to.
seconds.
Super quick. The previous point about how do you make sure you buy the right technology, I think it's really important to put on record, in my view, that I think that is in a marketplace, and I don't include you guys, where lots of vendors are trying to sell you the wrong technology. It is not a nice place to be a buyer in local government. There are lots of people trying to take money off you and not give you back what you
And that is where, how do you get a sort of form of like client marker in the NHS, they're introducing a passport, I can't remember, it's innovation passport, whatever it is. So if one place can demonstrate it, that's a sort of confirmation for other places that this is good technology to use, you don't have to go through it. Rachel, do you want to pick one of those? I imagine probably the AI question.
Yeah, I would say the way you actually get returns on AI is you buy good tech, but you buy from a provider who will actually partner with you on implementation. If it's just the tech, it can be the best, whizziest tech in the world, but you need people to actually be able to use it in their workflows, and you need people who understand what those workflows are so they can do it responsibly and safely. And then I think you see very real returns as it gets used. I don't have a great answer for the innovation one, but
That's
I think
perfect.
probably potholes that you should do.
That's the classic. We'd avoided also saying that, but right at the last minute. But yeah, that point about technology should enable the system change, not technology for technology's sake. Brilliant. And Jackie?
Yeah, I mean, I am going to go old school on the innovation. So there's a real risk that we know the majority of our budgets are spent on the smallest population, and as Robin said, that's going to get more and more extreme. We cannot take our eye off clean, green, safe places to live. Whether that is potholes, whether that's being a trusted voice around issues in relation to community cohesion, misinformation, etc. I think somehow we've got to find a way, because that's what our residents will tell us, quality of life and our role in relation to that space. And I think there's technology around that, which is one of the biggest issues for you, where to be at. But I think it's really important for councils that we keep that.
Yeah.
So.
And understanding what good life looks like for different types of communities and what their priorities are. And then final word.
Yeah, so I just thought immediately potholes. However, I'm not entirely optimistic about this, but
No, we've got to end on an optimistic note.
Okay. Neighbourhood health. If we are able to kind of manage and work together around locality neighbourhood health, that really focuses on people at risk of poor health and complex needs, and we're really bold in that space. Economic inactivity is such a worry, and we haven't recovered since the pandemic, and I think there's a lot of energy, a lot of pilots, a lot of work, so that's where we should be putting a lot of energy in that innovation space, because that's a lifetime of missed opportunity.
And that's a brilliant answer, and given that at the moment about 1 to 2% of people ever flow off the out of work disability or sickness benefits, that is a lifetime that we're just writing them off for. So getting that right. I think that's 100% right. Thank you so much. Honestly, that was such a brilliant conversation, or at least I thoroughly enjoyed it, and hopefully everyone else did as well. I don't think anyone's sticking around. If obviously you are sticking around to lunch, then you can pick up other questions and learn a bit more. Can I say a final thank you again to the supporters of the panel? Fascinating, really enjoyed it, and can everybody say a thank you to our brilliant performers.